So this is the Azwan Quarry, located in the southernmost part of Egypt. Solid granite, and this quarry has been used for several thousand years. The question is, how many thousands of years? These are the standard techniques used by the dynastic Egyptians for quarrying stone. And this as well. You see, very crude work. But what we're going to see is phenomenal. What we do find are these mysterious scoop marks, and what technology this was is still unknown. But it's clearly an example of lost ancient technology as compared, again, to the simple method used by the dynastic Egyptians of putting wedges in. So here we see side by side. On the right, you see the Egyptian technique. On the left, lost ancient high technology technique. So it's been described as scooping, but was it some kind of abrasive machine at work? Or something even more bizarre than that? Possibly a mechanism that emitted an energy field of some kind, destabilizing the quartz in the granite and causing the granite to turn into sand. Now here we're looking into the actual trough area of the 1,200-ton obelisk that was never completed. 1,200 tons. And here we get another visual look of the obelisk in its entirety, never completed. It's as if work suddenly stopped on this massive project. And again, these intriguing, even so-called scoop marks that we see in many different areas of the quarry, but especially where the unfinished giant obelisk is. Here you see the trough on the right side, and then here you see the trough on the left side, again with these very interesting even indentations. And this is called a test pit that goes down several feet. A human being could barely fit inside there, let alone try to work the surfaces. And again, these very intriguing, even marks and the complexity of the Azwan quarry itself. So let's see how the people with hand tools are now making progress. Completely ridiculous to think that that was the technique. This again, you see where wedges were put in by the dynastic Egyptians and even Romans to break stone. And then a smaller obelisk that also was never completed. These intriguing scoop marks. You can see they were working on both sides, the left and right, and they were almost able to release the stone from the quarry. But something happened in Aswan that stopped the work. And the question is, what was it? There can be no question but that there was a very advanced technological civilization in ancient Egypt before the Pharaohs. The reason this obelisk was not finished could have been the presence of this crack that appeared. And this is the interior of the great Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Now, Jason here, who was on our recent tour in March 2018, is inspecting this giant granite unfinished box. And what's amazing about this is we'll see obvious signs of lost ancient high technology, like that saw mark you see in the center of the video. Now, I think on purpose, they pushed this unfinished box against a wall so that you wouldn't inspect these amazing saw marks. But what we see are two circular saws working, one on top, one on the bottom, obviously powered by some kind of machine, and rapidly cutting through this granite which is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale, with diamond being 10. You can see that the top saw started to veer off course, cutting into the main part of the block, and then it wound up snapping half of the lid off. The lid was going to be from the same piece of stone, from the bottom to be placed on the top. And now, right next to it, we see another granite box, and this is a different type of saw working, almost like a bandsaw. Again, clearly working at high speed, and in terms of modern technology, that would require diamonds, a diamond-encrusted blade. Such a thing did not exist during dynastic times, so we have to consider the idea that these saw marks are from a much older civilization that had lost ancient high technology. Here again, the multiple saw marks. And then somewhat nearby is this basalt box. And what you can tell from here, again, is that the box itself had to have been made using advanced technology, and this object was found by the dynastic Egyptians, and then they simply carved these shallow vertical lines into the surface, probably with relatively crude tools, possibly Bronze Age, maybe even iron, but the lightness of the lines means that they were done more recently than the shaping of the box itself. So back to the so-called schist disc. It's called a schist disc because the archaeologists believe that it was made out of a stone called schist, but our geologist, Susan Moore, who is an expert, of course, on stone, believes that it's actually metamorphosed clay of some kind. That would mean that it would be very, very dense, and also would be able to resonate. So this object, whatever it was, clearly rotated, but the strange thing is that the fins, 3 of them that you see there, don't angle. So it isn't apparent whether it was pulling or pushing air or water. Maybe it was simply made to set up some kind of vibration. So when we look at the profile here, unfortunately it was found broken and very badly repaired, but again you can see it's a very complex piece of work. And it was found along in a cache with 30,000 to 40,000 turned very hard stone bowls and plates that could only have been made using lathes of some kind. And even the labels on these objects state that they're likely from the pre-dynastic or archaic period. So here's an approach again to the so-called schist disc. They put it here so that the sun shines on it, I think on purpose, so that it's very difficult to properly photograph. The fact that it's even still on display is quite amazing because it's very much an anomalous object which does not fit into either the time frame or the technology of the dynastic Egyptians. And here are some of the turned objects. These, again, are likely quite hard stone, and you can see they're perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, so they would have had to have been made on lathes. Since the archaeologists are stating that these are from the archaic period, that means that they were constructed prior to the invention of the potter's wheel. And a lathe is a far more complex machine than a potter's wheel. These could have been partially made on a lathe and then partially hand done because of the strange spouts that project off. But this fascinating object that has 5 lobes again, appears to have been made, at least partially, on some kind of ancient lathe device. And these are very hard granite, syenite, and diorite bowls and other vessels that could only have been made, again, on a lathe of some kind. Now, the idea that the lathes were operated by foot or hand are quite ridiculous, because in order to properly shape something like this, you have to have relatively high speed. So that means some kind of motor or engine would be involved, and those did not exist during the dynastic time period. And once again, many more of these objects. There are approximately 50 on display, but again, the cache that was found at Saqqara, the number of objects found was between 30,000 and 40,000. Many of them were found damaged or broken, and others unfinished. And here are some pottery vessels. These are from the dynastic time period. So it's very interesting that the ones that were turned on the lathe are even listed as being pre-dynastic, and yet these relatively crude pottery ones are from the later dynastic period. So what it's telling us, including this fascinating object here, is that the history of Egypt is far older and far more complex than most academics will state. And that's why these objects sitting in plain sight are fascinating and show us that it's very possible that there was a high-tech civilization existing 12,000 plus years ago in Egypt, and that these objects were inherited by the later dynastic people. What was this object? It looks like a flange of some kind. And note again that pieces are broken off. This damage appears to have happened in the very deep past, because a high percentage of these objects are broken, and they were supposedly found in a massive pile all together in an underground space. These are boomerangs that are on display. Is it possible that the dynastic Egyptians invented the boomerang, or could these objects have in fact come from Australia, where the more famous history of boomerangs we know of? And then this very strange object. It's apparently made out of very hard granite once again, and the tool marks that we see where these circles are appear to be machine marks. What it's used, or what it was used during dynastic times for, I don't know, but again, it seems to be an object that was inherited by the dynastic Egyptians. Notice the strange burn marks on it. The burn marks could very well have come from a cataclysm that occurred globally about 12,000 years ago. It not only affected sites in Egypt, but we see ample evidence in Peru, Bolivia, and other locations that have megalithic structures. And why is it that all of the large granite boxes appear to have significant damage, especially in the corners? And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology. And now we're in what's called the Amarna section, which is where we find the collection of statues and other works of Akhenaten, who personally is my favorite of the pharaohs. Here he is portrayed as being androgynous, possibly. It is believed by some experts on Akhenaten that he physically did look different from the average human being, and he simply told his artisans, "Portray me as I am." That shows that he had a high level of personal confidence. And here we have a classic portrayal of the Aten sun god with Akhenaten with possibly an elongated head. And there's Nefertiti on the left. And here we have the famous busts of his daughters, including Meritaten, who obviously is shown with an elongated head. And here, another view. It's amazing that only about a year ago we were allowed to start taking photographs and filming inside this museum. Before that, it was illegal. So we're starting at the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, which is reasonably close to Luxor. And this is a dynastic construction. You can see the massive size of these columns. There are actually probably too many than are what are required. But the major fascinating thing here are what are called the Dendera light bulbs. Now, whether they actually are light bulbs or not is very much up in the air. You can decide for yourself. But they're located in a very small underground chamber, which takes special access to get into. And this is what they look like. There are actually, I believe, 8 of them. You can see they kind of look like a light bulb, but other people say that there's something else. Another term used is a Crookes tube, which is a very simple light instrument. And here's a little video showing you the detail. The lighting in here is quite terrible, but it's a secret little chamber, very narrow access, and these are very curious sculptures. Then outside we see what are called keystone cuts, and there are hundreds of them here. It's likely that there were originally either bronze or wooden clamps to hold these sandstone blocks together. Probably wood, because that would take a lot of bronze. And now we're in the Valley of the Kings, and these are phenomenal shaft systems that of course were used as tombs, but it's highly unlikely that the pharaonic people or the dynastic people constructed them, because they're hundreds of feet long. Here's a diagram of the burial place of Seti I, and you see the hundreds of feet that these go on in the bedrock in the Valley of the Kings. There's no way that this could have been done with hand tools. They're way too long. So you can see this is actually quite close to the entrance going back out. And as I walk further back, these things are perfectly bilaterally symmetrical and just phenomenal. And this is the nature of the stone of the area, so you can see that it naturally fractures. So the idea that these were cut out with hand tools is quite ridiculous. They were probably done using some kind of high technology long before the dynastic times. Where we're going today is what is called the Osiris Shaft. And this has not been opened for decades, if not hundreds of years, to the general public. But thanks to the new Minister of Supreme Antiquities, it's open if you want to literally rent the space for 2 hours. Now, it's not open to the general public. It requires a special permission and fee, and that special permission or fee costs between $2,000 and $3,000 for a 2-hour period. But we decided to do that for our guests, and we will do this every year on our tour from now on. So this is our group lining up. The door has been unlocked, and so gradually we're going to start moving in. So this is the uppermost level, which is in the bedrock itself. And here comes Jason, who was in our group in March 2018, clearly thrilled at what he saw. And now we move in. Again, this is the surface level, which is in the bedrock itself. And now we look down to the second level. Now, I'm not going to tell you immediately how many levels there are. This is all part of the incredible experience of this space that has only been open since, I believe, November 2017. Now, this is down in the second level. You can see it's quite small. Nothing too incredible to look at in this space, except the fact that, again, it's cut in the bedrock. And this is giving you a view from the second level with the ladder up to where we first enter. So this is about 12 of us out of a total of 30. Getting ready to go down into the next level, but of course, because of the nature of the space, only a certain number could go down at a time. But this is looking down into what is the next level of the Osiris Shaft. Again, cut into the bedrock. This could not have been done with hand tools during the dynastic period, with bronze chisels, etc. So now we're down in the next level and looking up to the level above, which was the small room. You can see the ladder on the right is very rickety, but a newer one was installed, which is on the left-hand side, and it is quite a safe experience to go down. And now looking into this room, there are 6 niches, and in 2 of the niches are large stone boxes. You can see the tool marks here in the wall. The lighting isn't that great, so flashlights, of course, were required. And then, again, this is one of these stone boxes you can see on the left. Very mysterious. So this is moving into one of the niches. Again, 4 of them are empty. What has happened to the actual boxes, excuse me, if they were even in there, is unknown. But now we're going to focus on this, which is one of the boxes that has this very mysterious goo-like organic material on the surface and also inside. Next time we go in, I would like to actually take a sample in order to find out what that material is. It doesn't appear to simply be fire or smoke, because there's very little smoke on the ceiling. It seems as though something happened to whatever or whoever was inside the box, like an explosion of some kind. And then this is the other box, which is more roughly shaped. And inside, mysterious, massive damage. Again, as if the interior of the box exploded. Very strange. This isn't simply tomb robbers going in and trying to extract material from the interior. There's some kind of chemical process went in here, which is very weird. So again, looking up the ceiling, there are bits of splat, but not what I would call smoke or carbon material from a flame. Some other kind of strange phenomenon occurred here. And this box, supposedly the material is not granite, it's not basalt, it's not syenite, it's not diorite. It's a stone that is not found in Egypt. So weighing in at a minimum of 30 tons, where did this stone come from? How was it shaped? And how was it brought down the shaft system into this niche? Here again you can see the tool marks, very similar, almost scraping like tool marks. And then we're looking down into what will be the actual bottom level of the Osiris Shaft. This is Yusuf Awiyan, who was one of our guides. The water that he's in is crystal clear, and he's standing on top of another giant box that's submerged underwater. So we are presently 200 feet minimum underground in the Osiris Shaft. And there is underground water, of course, at Giza, but this water is crystal clear. So where exactly did it come from, and was it intended that this water be in there and be part of whatever process this structure originally performed? Because they call it a symbolic tomb, which is a really cheap way of saying we don't understand what this was made for, who made it, and when it was made. It's clearly megalithic, and thus it's likely at least 12,000 years old, and was found by the dynastic Egyptians. They did not construct this, because this possibly could be beyond 21st century technology that was involved, which we see also at other places in ancient Egypt. The clear signs of lost ancient high technology that was present long before the time of the Pharaonic people. I believe the stone is called dacite. I might be wrong. That would be D-A-C-I-T-E. Interestingly, inside this niche is a recessed area where a human-sized sarcophagus could have once been. That could have been an actual dynastic burial, but the other two boxes and the one submerged underwater were beyond the technological capability of the dynastic Egyptians, and thus has to be much, much older. So I'm not interested in the dynastic period, though it's a splendid history of ancient Egypt. What I'm looking for are examples of lost ancient high technology and catastrophic damage. So what we're seeing here are very hard stone surfaces that appear not to have been necessarily vandalized, but more likely were victims of a massive cataclysm of some kind. Now, some of these surfaces you can see, the weathering is very strange. It's like the stones were hit with a very high heat. Not simple vandalism, though of course the structures would have been utilized as quarries during the dynastic times, and also well into the Roman times. But what has happened to this little pyramid? It's not simply people taking hammers and trying to break it up. It looks like it has been struck by high heat. And we'll see many other examples of this that tend to support Dr. Robert Schoch's theory that plasma was ejected from the sun and struck certain parts of the earth about 12,000 years ago. So when you look at the top layer of the soil, see it's orangey, brownish looking. That's what happens to limestone when it's hit with very high heat. And here is another example. The top surface is there. And again, how was this little pyramid, which was immaculately constructed, how was it damaged so heavily like this? Again, my theory, and when we look at these burn marks that you see on the surface of the limestone, was that this pyramid and others were hit by solar plasma 12,000 years ago. And then later, they were found by the dynastic Egyptians somewhere around 5,000 years ago. So let's go inside the pyramid here, the pyramid of Unas. Unas was a pharaoh. He was quite possibly buried in this pyramid, but he and his people did not construct it. The walls in this case appear to be granite on the left and right sides, and the lid, or ceiling, and that granite would have been brought from at least 500 miles away from the quarries at Azwan. And here again, the walls appear to be granite. If this was used for strength, that is a possibility. However, it may have been used for energetic purposes, which is something I get into in other videos that I've done about Egypt. And now we're going to go into the back recess underground here at the Unas Pyramid and have a look at this really intriguing box that some people would say is a sarcophagus, but the stone is very fine, tight-grained granite. And again, the box would have had to have been transported from Aswan, which is more than 500 miles away. And it appears that the lid was supposed to hermetically seal the box. Now, for most of their time, the dynastic people only had Bronze Age level technology, so there's no way that they were able to shape this box with such finesse. Now, here we are at one of my favorite places at Saqqara, and this is called the Serapeum. Again, notice that the upper layer appears to be burnt or scorched by heat. And as we walk into the Serapeum, this is one of the most spectacular places by far in all of ancient Egypt because of the mysterious boxes we're going to look at. If the lights weren't on, this place would be pitch black. And so how could they possibly have quarried out this huge tunnel system that goes through it? There's no appearance of any soot or anything like that on the ceiling. And so the construction of this tunnel system, which appears to have been repaired, as you can see on the left, in different periods of time, the lighting must have been artificial in some way. And though that sounds hard to believe, you will believe it when you see what these boxes look like. It appears in some ways that the Serapeum is a climate-controlled atmosphere, because every time I've been there, and it's been at least 6 times so far, it's always about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or approximately 20 degrees Celsius, which is a very pleasant temperature. It's not like something like the interior of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, which is very, very warm. So the coolness, of course, is because it's subterranean, but the question is, what are these immense objects that we're about to see? How were they created? What were they possibly used for? And why, when Mariette discovered them, were all of the lids except one pried open? Very mysterious place. So the lid of this box weighs 30 tons, and the box itself weighs 70 tons. So that's 100 tons, and you can see the highly polished surfaces with the really crappy hieroglyphics done. Conventional academics insist that the shaping of the box and the hieroglyphics are contemporary with one another, but that is completely ridiculous. It's quite obvious that the dynastic people found these boxes in situ and in some cases decided to carve hieroglyphics in some of them. Again, the stone likely came either from the eastern desert or from Aswan. Also, these recesses you can see in the walls are larger than the length of the lid of the box. So that means that the indentations were likely made so that the tops, 30 tons apiece, could swivel open. And again, the surfaces beautifully polished. The lid fits on so tightly that it would hermetically seal the box. There's no way a Bronze Age culture could have possibly done this work. Though the hieroglyphics, of course, they very much could have done. They are very crude, and because of the granular nature of the granite with the quartz content, that's why the lines are not straight. And why are these indentation areas polished as well? It's very odd that the original builders didn't make them perfectly flat surfaces. If this was a resonant box of some kind for high technology or some other function, it could be that the indentations were for final tuning of the box, because the acoustics inside are absolutely astonishing, and the box loves the sound of the tone Om. So again, the hieroglyphics are so crude, whoever the artisan was, he could not even, or she, could not even make a straight line because of the granular nature and the content of very hard quartz, which is in the material itself. But the high polish of the surfaces is quite amazing. You would likely need to have something like diamond, dust, or powder to be able to produce a polished surface like that. And then as we turn, we're going to explore the fact that there are more than 20 of these massive boxes in situ in the Serapeum at Saqqara. Now, not only are they in the niches, but you can notice they're about 5 feet down into the niche. So the box would have to have been moved through the corridor, turned around a corner, and be gently placed downwards by about 6 feet or 2 meters into the niche itself. And again, intriguing that the interior walls are wider so that the top of the box could swivel freely. But how are you going to move a 30-ton lid by hand in such a narrow space? So we continue walking through the tunnel labyrinth system here at the Serapeum, and this little hallway connects up with the second long tunnel. It does not have niches in it, but it seems to be the way that the stone boxes were transported into the other tunnel system. And what we're going to see here is very much telltale as to what was going on in ancient Egypt before the time of the dynastic people. What we're coming up to is one of the giant boxes without the lid, and the surface is relatively rough. So it was shaped likely before it was brought into the tunnel system of the Serapeum. And this is like it's locked in time. Something happened at the Serapeum, stopping all work. Once again, there's no soot or anything like that on the ceilings, and so candles or torches or whatever would not have been used in the fabrication of the tunnels or the movements of the boxes themselves. So artificial lighting of some kind would have to have been used, and this goes along with the fact that these boxes had to have been made utilizing high levels of very advanced technology, in some cases technology beyond our capacity today. So as we walk past the unfinished box that likely would have been finished once it was very close to its niche, we see in the background the lid that was to accompany the box. So it's very likely, and it's telling us, that the box would have been moved first, then the lid second. The box would have probably then been put into its niche, then the lid, 30 tons, put on top of the box. But how was the polishing done to make such a beautiful seal? And then we have this other orphaned lid here, and we're going to go back into the main tunnel to see where its companion box might be located. So again, this is the main tunnel, and here you can see the flashlights glinting off a smaller box, but very finely crafted, with some crude hieroglyphics put on later. This is the companion box for that monstrous lid that we saw just previously. You can see it wasn't finally finished, so the finishing would have to have been done in the niche itself. And Saqqara is a massive, massive site, and so there are other underground structures that we visited. Not as impressive as the Serapeum, but still, if you're going to spend the entire day at Saqqara, then it's well worth to make efficient use of your time. So now this shows the difference between the bedrock and here blocks in between the front paws of the Sphinx. And then this wooden walkway, which is in between the front paws. And again, a lot of reconstruction has been done to the Sphinx over the course of possibly 4,500 years. You can see relatively modern rebuilding, and then much older. And then the bedrock itself. But you see that this is one of the back paws, and it clearly has been reconstructed in relatively recent times as compared to the weathering of the Sphinx enclosure. Again, major emphasis on the vertical weathering, because that indicates precipitation. And if you didn't know, there is an entrance near the very back end of the Sphinx. There is a ladder inside, so there could be a labyrinth of shafts and tunnels under the Sphinx and the entire Giza Plateau. Once again, the vertical water weathering and the excessive and extreme erosion that we find at the Sphinx. Different layers are different hardnesses, so the softer layers were carved out much more rapidly than the harder layers. You see the undulating lines. And this shows you the extent of the Sphinx enclosure itself, that the Sphinx was carved out of the bedrock itself. And there are the blocks taken from the Sphinx enclosure to build the Sphinx and Valley temples. So once again, on the left, you see that's bedrock. On the right, those are blocks. So the story that there is an entrance to the Sphinx in the front is likely true, because if you look at the rectangular system of boards there, that section can actually be taken out. And so it's believed that the Egyptologists have discovered the underground tunnel and shaft systems that exist under the Sphinx itself, extending likely all the way at least to the Great Pyramid, if not beyond. On the left you saw that bit of repair and this strange channel, which is really quite rough, but I never noticed this on previous trips. There's a channel that basically goes all the way around the Sphinx. Whether it was done during dynastic times or not is unknown. It's not very sophisticated. But just to emphasize one more time, the vertical weathering was precipitation. And it has not rained much around the Giza Plateau. Climatologists also tell us for at least 10, if not 12,000 plus years, making the Sphinx at least twice as old as the dynastic Egyptians. And there again is the entrance to a shaft with a metal ladder inside. Of course, it's illegal to go in there, but I filmed it so you could see. And more or less finally, once again, the extreme weathering marks on the limestone of the bedrock of the Sphinx enclosure. All of the repair work that's been done over the Sphinx over the course of up to 4,500 years. Some Egyptologists insist that Khufu was the one who constructed the Sphinx, but it's likely he and Khafre were the ones who did repairs. And this shows you again the transition between the bedrock and then these blocks of limestone and the rectangular section, which underneath is believed to be the entrance to the shaft and tunnel systems. Now this strange location is called Tanis, and it's in the Nile Delta in northern Egypt. It takes 3.5 hours to drive from Cairo, and for the last 2 hours we drive through lush vegetation and agricultural farmland. So the question is, why is Tanis seemingly devoid of life, and why is every sculpture and obelisk and pillar, etc., smashed to pieces? This is way beyond the damage of any marauding army or vandalism. This is cataclysmic destruction, and we're going to see lots of evidence of heat scorching on the surfaces of a lot of the stone. Now, most of the stone, which is located at Tanis, such as this, is granite, and it's likely that the granite came from the great quarry at Azwan, and Aswan is 1,000 kilometers to the south. So how was all of this transported? These are small pieces. Again, notice the very strange erosion of the surfaces. And the only piece that seems to have been intact is this quartzite box. The hieroglyphics were likely done by the dynastic Egyptians, but it's clear that the dynastic Egyptians found the site of Tanis in complete destruction, and so they decided to build there and recycle with what they found. Now again, is this erosion natural or normal, or could it be the result of intense blasts of heat? This gives you the visual. Again, you can see that Tanis is more or less devoid of life, except for the odd thorny bush, like the one you can see on the right here. And when you walk on the surface, it's not like you're walking in sand or on dirt, but more like flour, as if all of the nutrients was burnt out of the soil itself. And this gives you an idea of the sheer volume of stone found at Tanis. Again, likely from the Azwan granite quarry, 1,000 kilometers to the south. And as you can see, every single stone shows incredible levels of damage. Archaeologists tried to put this sculpture together, but it does look like some of the extensions of it, like the arms, were literally blown off. This fits in well with the theory of Dr. Robert Schoch regarding solar plasma striking the Earth 12,000 years ago. And this is another example. You can see that the right-hand side of that statue has been hit with at least 2,000 degrees Celsius of heat. Now, all of this stone was found by archaeologists in the 19th century underground. They had to dig down 10 to 20 feet in order to find Tanis. And here you can see that this wall section, in fact, was probably rebuilt by the dynastic Egyptians, possibly 2 or 3 or 4,000 years ago. And look at that slab of granite on the left where Irene is standing. Massive. So this area may have been exposed during dynastic times, and they built that wall section. There are also an incredible number of obelisks and sections of obelisks located in Tanis, more than at any other location by far in Egypt. This would not have been a place where obelisks were manufactured because, again, the quarry is 1,000 kilometers away. So they would have been made at Aswan and then transported to different locations around Egypt. But also what we know is that the obelisks themselves are megalithic, and they were constructed in pre-dynastic times by a civilization that clearly had lost ancient high technology because the Bronze Age dynastic people could not shape granite surfaces like this. They could etch in hieroglyphics, but they couldn't shape sculptures like this. Now here again, the bottom of the statue, we're seeing intense heat. This has been corroborated by geologists that we've had on location. And again, it looks like sections of that statue were blown off, not struck off. Here's another statue. You see the left-hand side has been melted. These sculptors would have made sure that the stone was very consistent and homogeneous before they started the sculpture, so it's not a flaw in the stone, it's a heat effect that happened to the stone in the very distant past. Again, a massive block of stone, at least 20 tons. Surface erosion is excessive. And just everything is broken on a massive scale. Vandals with hammers could not do this kind of damage. This had to have been done by some sort of natural external force that literally blew Tanis to pieces. And we also see evidence of this at other locations such as Karnak and the Ramesseum and other locations to the south. But it's here. Look, another obelisk section on the left. And the fineness and depth of this carving, again, appears to be machined, not done by hand. So we're looking at the possibility that even hieroglyphics are older than the dynastic Egyptians. When you look into the background, that is the original level that archaeologists found in this area. So they had to dig down in order to expose all of the stone. Again, look at the blackness on that stone on the right. That appears to be heat. So this is an overview of Tanis, or at least this is what we were allowed to see. It's in the middle of an army/police base, and we were only allowed to see a certain section of it. If I started to wander off and look at other areas, I was immediately told to come back. And so why they're being so secretive here is a very good question. Again, devastating damage. The stone is strewn all over the place. This is not a civilization moving in and taking over and deciding to destroy ancient structures. There's another obelisk you see in the background with Yusuf Awiyan, another obelisk section, and then another obelisk section. There are between 10 and 20, if not more, obelisks that were found in the area, all broken. And again, this surface appears to be machined, not done with chisels. So that is lost ancient high technology evidence. Another section of an obelisk with very deep carving into the granite surface. And of course, the stone has been lined up during the excavation times by the archaeologists. Here you see more sections of obelisks. And the new prevailing theory is that the obelisks were originally made not as standing monuments for the glorification of the ancient Egyptian rulers, but in fact they were part of an energetic system. They were the receivers of energy emitted from the power plants or energy structures that we call the pyramids, located around the Giza Plateau area. There's a perfect circular hole that could have been machined. And then we get to the tomb area. And if you look carefully, you can see that all of this stone was restacked during dynastic times. The giant blocks of granite were likely there originally. Then the dynastic people simply took stone from the area, especially this limestone on the left, and piled it up to create a tomb. Inside this one, we find a granite box. This likely was a sarcophagus. The roughness of the surface shows that it was probably done during dynastic times because it's not that well done as compared to the finer craftsmanship of the older megalithic work. And then when we look up, we'll see that this top block has hieroglyphics on it. So clearly that was recycled from an older structure. The dynastic Egyptians did not move any material in terms of stone into the area. They simply recycled what they found. And their technical prowess was not much compared to that of the earlier lost ancient high technology civilization. Here again, we see a much larger box, which they would call a sarcophagus, with the top snapped off as if it was hit with an enormous force. And one last wander through the area of Tanis we were allowed to see, which was quite extensive. And again, you can tell this area was probably exposed and opened during dynastic times, and the stone was reconstructed, or the wall was reconstructed by the dynastic people. See the very poor work on the left-hand side. That's an addition during dynastic times. And the simple fact that this whole area here is devoid of life except for a handful of prickly bushes gives us a strong indication that solar plasma struck this area about 12,000 years ago. This is corroborated by Dr. Robert Schoch, who's a geologist, and also accounted in my book, Aftershock. Here again, we see more melted surface on this piece of quartzite. It is like a giant came in and just knocked everything to pieces, but it wasn't a giant, it was a giant force that came from outside of the Earth, plasma ejection from the sun, most likely striking at sunrise around 12,000 years ago. It could have been a series of events, not just one simple one-day event, but it could have taken place over the course of up to 300 years, according to Dr. Robert Schoch, that would have vaporized anything and anyone that was in this area. The soil might have been blown up into the sky and then came down and covered the whole site, because here I am on the original surface level. This is the surface that the archaeologists found, and in order to see the artifacts, you have to climb down, again, between 10 and 20 feet. And these mysterious men in black were with us. There were 4 or 5 of them. Very nice suits, sunglasses, automatic weapon hiding underneath his jacket. They were keeping a very fine eye on our activity.